Hello everyone, welcome to Analog IAS Current Affair Analysis for 26th of May 2021. These are the issues that we'll be discussing today. One of the biggest problem plaguing the judiciary is pendency of cases. So in order to clear this pending cases, the Supreme Court took a decision. So it is bringing back retired judges as ad hoc judges to clear the pending cases. Even before, in the collegium system, the government was questioned why no decision was taken after the collegium has given certain recommendations for appointments in various high courts, yet there was no decision taken. Therefore, Supreme Court had to take this decision based on Article 224A of the Constitution, which provides for appointment of ad hoc judges in the high courts. So the Chief Justice of India, S.A. Bobde, was also heading a bench, and he made it clear that the challenge of mounting arrears and existing vacancies requires a recourse to this Article 224A. If you take a look at the percentage of cases or number of cases, 57 lakh cases are pending in high courts. There is a vacancy level of nearly 40% of judges. So 5 high courts account for nearly 54% of these cases. One interesting fact here is we generally think that there is a correlation between the number of pending cases and vacancies. But let us take the Madras High Court for example, where the vacancy is just 7%, yet it has nearly 5.4 lakh pending cases. In government's defense, Attorney General said that there were 220 vacancies, but it got only 196 vacancies recommendations. So unless and until the entire list is updated, hence there is a delay in appointment. So what we can safely say is it is not just the problem of center not cooperating. Sometimes even the states have not upgraded their infrastructure. Till now, even after the pandemic has stuck the world, Indian judiciary has not evolved beyond Zoom meetings. It was time and an opportunity to actually utilize this window to upgrade the infrastructure and move towards e-courts. E-courts as a concept is not a new one. It is a pretty old one, but it is in a very nascent stage because of lack of encouragement to this idea. Now with the pandemic coming into the scene, many litigants were forced to move their hearings online, and even the courts have moved online. Taking this idea forward, we have to digitize and upgrade the infrastructure to achieve the speed, scale, and at the same time ensure that justice is delivered on time. That is the gist of this article. Lessons COVID taught. This article is about the kind of lessons that we have to learn from our experience in 2020 with respect to the first wave of COVID. So are we listening to the lessons taught in the first year of COVID-19 is what this article is asking. The first impact that India felt in the wake of the lockdown imposed last year to contain the first wave was the migrant crisis. The first thing that you would notice in a migrant crisis is the lack of social security they have. One can understand the vulnerability of these kind of jobs in our country, and the harsh reality is that 90% of the jobs do not have social security because of the informal nature of these jobs. So what did we create actually? What is the kind of development we're talking about in the post LPG reforms? After 1991, we have seen a scenario where a lot of people moved out of agriculture because it is no longer remunerative. At the same time, the advantage it created for India is it created a huge pool of cheap labor. But the issue of cheap labor was not balanced by creating a social security net, and at the same time, the other problem, the other dimension is that inequality was rising equally. In this entire economic model, we have not considered what is the end objective of this development. We are always focused on growth, but is growth actually ensuring equity is the question that we have failed to answer comprehensively according to the writer. Now we have to understand that the informal sector of the economy requires certain social security nets. But is it right to treat the entire informal sector where 90% of the population works as vulnerable? If that is the case, India would not have been having the kind of purchasing power parity. So it is important to understand the composition of this 90% of workforce. So here is where we have to think about changing the structure of this informal sector and protecting the vulnerable people. For this, we can take a cue from the Atmanirbhar policy, which was taken up by the government. The agenda of this is to procure or produce locally. What can we produce locally? That is the question. If you see the expenditure of a common household, most of the expenditure is incurred towards daily items, that is consumable goods like soaps, toothpaste, washing powder, all the daily household items that you need. All these items are actually procured from multinational companies or FMCG giants which have global presence. So naturally it is observed that the money is being placed in the MNCs. What is the kind of employment that they would create? The alternative suggested has its basis not just in the philosophy of Atmanirbharta but also in the concept of Swarajya that was envisaged by Gandhiji. So local production can actually reduce the cost and ensure security of jobs for a lot of local people. So this is the first step that we can take. But is this what happening in the government's most recent package, which was labeled as Atmanirbhar Bharat? Not exactly. What it is actually doing is, from a very distant place like foreign markets, it is increasing the FDI, but the control over local resources is continuously decreasing, thereby making the issue of security of jobs even more vulnerable for the local population. Because what these companies would demand is easing of labor laws. Now, if labor laws are actually eased, the already vulnerable social security aspect is even more vulnerable now. How do we deal with this? For this, the author quotes the example of Kerala's Kudumbashri. So, the self-help group concept in Kerala has actually seen wonderful results according to the view of the author, because it has enabled dignified livelihoods to several women in Kerala, especially in the rural sector. How did they do it? So the concept of self-help group is one where a group of women come together collectively, mobilize resources, use it for their businesses and payback. So if SHGs are actually getting microcredit from institutionalized financial agencies, like say for example banks, or sometimes even intermediaries or non-banking financial companies, or even government credit directly through banks, then it will empower these women. If they are actually economically empowered, if you take a look at the statistics also, the propensity to avoid payments or default of payments is very very low compared to MNCs. Therefore, the model of economic development should be think global but act local. Now when you say act local, you have to actually empower them, not just in financial matters but also in decision making. So for this to happen, they have to increase the ability of these local produce to be exposed well to international markets. Now for that, the government must take active help in marketing these products. For this, probably we can even use avenues like e-commerce websites, for example Amazon. One more aspect that most of policymakers missed in the last COVID wave is the fact that certain vulnerable sections like the tribals, they have Forest Rights Act for their safety. But are we actually realizing the potential of the Forest Rights Act? we have as many as 50,000 families of tribals whose rights are not yet realized. Even the judiciary has sometimes asked locals to evict the place because they didn't produce a proper proof of residence or a proof that they indeed belong to that forest area. So, how do we deal with this? Even if you take a look at the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, which were meant to empower the village and city assemblies, or even the Forest Rights Act, all these are about local administration. But the major problem is they don't have the power to economically make themselves self-sustainable. So, what are the steps that we are taking? We cannot expect a center like New Delhi to remotely control everything that is happening on the ground across the country. For this to be a reality, we need to have a real time data, but the need is also to decentralize decision making and respect the spirit of democracy. And this is not just pertinent to the idea of politics but also to economy, and that exactly is the manifestation of the true spirit of Atmanirbharta, wherein you empower the local population to produce the local goods that will save a lot of money. So, according to the view of the author, empowering the locals, not just economically but also socially, is the way forward to deal with further crises like COVID. Whenever decision making is centralized and implementation is decentralized, when policymakers at the center take inputs from the local bodies, only then we'll have a comprehensive policy that is designed at the center but executed at the local level. Even if we take the example of how China contained the deadly virus, that is what happened. They have taken inputs from the locals, understood the ground realities, and created a country level policy which was executed locally. This execution is all that matters, because unless and until the local population knows how to execute this, it is simply not possible. That is the gist of this article.